Hi there, Havovi Tarapur here. Today is Mother's Day when I'm recording this, and what an amazing day to talk about Mother Earth or Spenta Armaity. So, what are the um, divine virtues of Spenta Armaity? What can we learn from them, and how do we apply them to our lives in a way that we can continue to move down that path of individual spiritual alchemy? Again, that path is one that takes our basic human character and converts it into a more saintly character, and from saintly to a more divine character. It's the fundamental concept underneath all our Zoroastrian prayers and Kriya. So, why do we need to go down this path? What is the necessity for individual spiritual alchemy? Well, we all know that life itself is both full of positive and negative. We go through happiness, we go through sadness, we go through pain, we go through sorrow, and all these things are part of our karmic cycle, and and we go through also health and happiness. But this karmic cycle that keeps us coming back to earth, coming back into rebirth and death, and again rebirth, life and death, this whole cycle, to remove ourselves from this cycle and to fulfill Dadara Mazda's original will, which is to become perfected and return to him, we have to progress down this path of spiritual alchemy. So why can't we just return to him the way we are? Of course, he loves us, right? God loves everybody. It doesn't matter what religion you are in. God loves everybody. So so why then this necessity for all this strenuous emotional and physical and spiritual activity? So, for example, imagine that I have here two buckets, two buckets beside me. One is filled with water and one is filled with oil. Now, if as a comparison, if the ocean were Dada or Mazda or God by any name, and if we have to return to him and become one with him, which one is going to merge into that ocean? The bucket of water or the oil? Obviously, if I throw the water in the ocean, it's impossible to retrieve it again. You will not be able to find that same bucket because it has now merged. It's impossible to identify the difference between this drop of water and that drop of water. So basically, our characters have to become exactly like Dador Mazda, exactly like his Yazids and assessments, in order for us to become one with him ultimately and remove ourselves from this cycle of birth and death. On the other hand, if I have this pail of oil and I throw that into the ocean, obviously it's not going to merge. It will be on the top of the ocean, but it will still be not part of the ocean. You will have to, you can still collect it, you can still move it, you can still take it out because of its own character. Because of the characteristics of the oil, it cannot merge with water. And similarly, because of our personal basic human characteristics, which has both positive and negative, because we have not attained a level of spiritual purity, of thought, of purity of action, of purity of desires and emotions, because we haven't reached that level of perfection of those things, we simply cannot merge into Dada or Mazda. And so we're now on a process of learning about how to become this perfection in character, perfection in thought and deed and emotion, that ultimately we will be able to merge into Dadurmaza just as the bucket of water merges into the ocean. Indeed, the bucket is not the same as the ocean. The ocean is full of life. It renovates, it does everything. It's like Dadurmaza, but the bucket is, if you leave it out, it'll become stale. It's not the same thing, but similar to us and our souls, when we are just um, small duplicates of Dador Mazda. We are not everything that he is. We can never be everything, but we can make ourselves of that quality of a human being, of that quality of thought and deed and emotion, that we can ultimately merge into him, unidentifiable after that. So So this is the process. So how do we do that? The process is to look at his husbands, because to merge into him, we have to be more like him. And his Amashaspan's are basically emanations of himself. Dador Mazda himself has emanated these seven Amashaspan's. Orma's Amashaspan is actually Dador Mazda in the wearing the cap of an Amashaspan. And then we have the other six Amashaspan's. And each one of those Amashaspan's has one um, one aspect of creation, and that aspect has come into play because of its own virtues. So, so we're going to take a look at those virtues, and today we're just going to talk about Spenta Armaity. But individually, we're going to talk about those virtues. And today, I'm going to throw up a chart here so you can take a look at it. And if you take a good look at it, you will see that there's one row here of the Amishaspan's, Ormus Bamanadi Beshara Asmundad Kordad and Amardad. Then there's the part of creation that those Amishaspan's are in charge of or manifest. Now, remember, manifesting does not mean it is the entirety of that Amishaspan. For example, today's topic is Spenta Armaity. So the little planet that we call Earth is not the entire manifestation of Spenta Armaity. It is just one small bit. She is much greater than that. Okay, but it is her manifestation, and it is manifested depending on her, according to her qualities, so and her virtues. So after that, we see what these virtues are. In the next column, we see that the divine virtues of each of these Amishaspan's. And then in the following column, we see what human virtues we have to develop within ourselves to parallel those divine virtues of the Amishaspan's. So if you look at that chart, we can see that Benta Armaity, she is in charge of the earth, land, and the treasures beneath the earth. So let's discuss that a little bit. So here we have the globe itself, the earth itself, and why the treasures beneath the earth? Well, these two things are based on her qualities. One is perfect humility towards Dadora Mazda, and the other is the ability to alchemize pollutants or trash into something beautiful, into precious stones. So, what can we learn from this? First of all, why is Earth um, sort of the representation of her humility? Well, because she is actually bearing the burden of all our imperfect souls that are here on earth to learn and grow, and life after life, year after year, millennia after millennia. We are here, and she is sacrificing her own um, perfect freedom in heaven, her own perfect existence, in order to support the souls like us who are deficient in divine knowledge, who have some imperfections in them. And she does so because of her humility to Dara Mazda. And that humility also means that she has no sense of ego. So there's no sense of self. There's no sense of what about me. The idea is that when we talk about humility, it's combined with that sense of lack of ego and lack of sense of self, and realizing that there's a greater purpose, and I'm doing all this for this greater purpose, just as a mother actually would for her children, just as a mother would um, care for her children, clean up for her children, clean the house, cook the food, do everything. Similarly, because the mother wants those children to grow up healthy, grow up happy, she's there to educate them, and she's doing it all out of her love. So similarly, Spenta Armaity is doing that for all humanity. She is upholding us. She is renovating the earth constantly, regardless of how much garbage we throw onto her. Not only our mental, emotional garbage, but actually even the physical garbage that we actually put into the earth. We pollute the waters, we pollute the environment to no extent and no limit. Yet she continuously works selflessly with one thought that we have to become alchemized, become perfected, go back to Dada or Mazda. And in this sense, her humility, her selflessness, and her lack of ego is all showing up in what she's doing as she works for us. That's one aspect of earth. The other aspect is this very thing of garbage. Now, in material form, we can talk about actual garbage. We can say we can throw garbage outside. There can be dead animals outside. They can be anything, and ultimately, she will due to her um, due to her gravitational force, she will ultimately pull those items within the core of herself until they are compressed to the extent that they become coal, to the extent that they become precious stones and diamonds. So here you can see this is what Spenta Armaity is doing for us so selflessly forever and well, basically forever until we're all perfected. So, what then, if you look at the chart, I'm just looking down here. So, what then can we learn from this? So, how does this converting trash into treasure apply to us? How does this selflessness and ego and humility, lack of ego and humility apply to us? So, let's talk about one thing at a time. One thing at a time is, first of all, humility. Now, we often talk about ourselves that we are humble, that we don't have an ego, we have no pride. But here we're not talking about just that very outward show of pride uh, that most people dislike in others to see that pride. What we're talking about here is the humbleness to first of all accept God's will. Just as Spenta Armaity is accepting God's will, she is saying that Dada or Mazda wants all these souls to be alchemized, and I am doing this work for him. So, similarly, when things happen to us in our life, or just our own actual life circumstances, where we're born, how we're born, everything that in our lives, our whole circumstance, everything is according to God's will. And when we can sort of put our heads down and say, this is God's will, and I accept it. I only need help to um, bear the circumstances or need help to know how to deal with these circumstances and pray for those things. Then we are starting to develop a level of humility. And that can apply to just so many things. It can apply to from from something happening to somebody to choices that we think we have freedom of choices and rights to do things um, and change things, which not I'm not saying that they're all wrong, but I'm saying that there are certainly there are limits, and we have to question all of those things. That are we doing it within humility? Are we doing it within the framework of I accept God's will? And I know that there is something in there that I have to learn from it. I know that there is something in there that I will gain from it, whether it's the payback or overcoming of karmic debt, or whether it's moving forward spiritually. Because oftentimes when all life is good and everything is good in our life and perfect, um, and there's no pain and there's no sadness. Of course, we all want that, but oftentimes what happens is we forget about God and we forget about divinity, because what happens is we start fixating our attention on all the things that please us, whether, with our five senses, whether it would be a beautiful home, beautiful environment, beautiful clothes, whether it be good food, you know, anything, good cars, whatever it is, vacations, and the whole thing is that nothing is wrong in all of that. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying, when everything is just running smoothly, we tend not to think. We tend to focus more on what we can get more out of life, and we forget about our spiritual duty and a reason that we are born here. So sometimes, unfortunately, because of our lack of attention to our own spirituality, unfortunately, sometimes we have to be brought back um, into the awareness that there is something more to be done with our lives than just living it up. So sometimes we suffer some sadness, sometimes we suffer some pain or hurt, whatever it is. And those things, when we suffer it, um, whether it's through somebody or through our own selves, the whole thing is that coming back to the very first step of, I accept God's will. I have to move down this path. He has put me in this circumstance, and I have to move forward. And I want His help to move forward. And when we do that, it's the beginning of kind of um, compressing or recognizing that our ego and our idea of what we have an idea of self is not all there is to life and this world. And so slowly we begin to realize that um, this idea of ego, this idea of self, has to also start breaking down. And when we want to break that down, we start realizing that when we look in the mirror, we can only see ourselves. When we look around, we can just see what we see, or hear what we hear. And our whole life and all our thoughts and our actions and our emotions and our desires are all based on only what we see, what we hear, what we smell, what we taste, what we feel. And when we feel a deeper kind of hurt and we reach out to God, it makes us realize that there is something else out there other than the three dimensions that we see, and the five, and the three dimensions that we can see, and our five senses. So we start wanting to break through that. And when we start breaking through that, when we start breaking through those barriers, when we do it with faith and prayers, and the um, whole regimen that is set up for you in your religion, whatever religion you are. But as a Zoroastrian, it's Matra, Mitra, Yasna, it's path of Ashoy, it's path of Tarikat. So this is our path that is set out for us. In other religions, it's different paths. So when we start moving on that path, it helps us break through these limitations that our mind is sort of bound by. And when we break through those limitations, we realize that there is just so much more out there. For example, we cannot even see our own soul. We cannot even see our own aura. We cannot see our 16, energy centers. So here, that slow realization and that slow awareness that there's more to being um, there's more to this life than just what we call self or gratification of self. So let me just take a little few minutes to discuss a few other religions, because this idea of humility and um, and selflessness, rejecting ego, is not only a Zoroastrian concept, in the sense that the whole path of spiritual alchemy is a specific recipe in nature. and all religions will have these steps in them. So you must know that in Hinduism, um, or Buddhism, the first step is the idea of rejection of self. And their path to learning this, of course, is through detachment. And and if you look at, I won't go too deep, but if you look at the Jewish religion, here, again, we're talking about following and accepting the law of God and moving on that. It's the first step is still humility, whether you understand it or not. The idea of accepting it, moving on that path, doing doing what is required of you by God. Silence, suffering, all these things are basically controlling the ego, and through humility, in that sense. In the Muslim religion, the same thing. Service to God is the sense of selflessness, basically, an idea of removing that ego and putting God's work first, service to God. In Christianity, in the ladder of faith, it's courage and temperance, moderation and restraint in action, which is really no different than our practice of selflessness and courage. So all of these things are in all religions, and I like to always draw in comparisons, because I'm not here to sort of tell you that Zoroastrianism is the best, but I do feel that many people um, do not understand or do not realize how much depth there is in Zoroastrianism, especially when we just keep repeating the three words: good thoughts, three phrases of good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. So, going back to the topic of developing the virtues of Spenta Armaity, here we see on the chart up here, if you look on your chart, that one of the things that we have to learn to develop within ourselves is the conversion of hatred into love. Now, how does one do that? Um, it is a very difficult process, but we'll discuss about how to do it later on. I just want to talk about first that idea of where did that come from her virtues. Her virtues are the ability to take trash and garbage and any kind of pollutants we put on the earth, on Mother Earth. She converts it sooner or later through her spinning, through her actions, through her renovation. She will convert these pollutants into something good, and trash and garbage into something like precious stones and diamonds. And this is all the outcome of her good work. So, what we have to do in comparison to that is convert hatred into love, not just our hatred, and uh, not just by saying we love everybody and we don't hate anybody. It's very easy to make these statements until something bad happens. And when something really bad happens, those are the challenges that we are faced with. So we discussed earlier that sometimes when life is running perfectly, we're not challenged to this depth. We're not challenged to put our ourself aside and figure out why God has brought this challenge to us. So sometimes when we are faced with difficulties, it is good to apply all of these thoughts. You know, um, how do we learn to love somebody who has hurt us? How do we learn to love somebody who has hurt our family or our children? I mean, these are very difficult things to do. So, but once you apply these ideas of Spent or Almighty, once you realize that you are here, yes, it hurts. It's not giving an excuse for the person who has done something wrong, but it does present an opportunity for us to grow spiritually. And once we are kind of able to overcome our initial hurt or initial anger or initial reactions, whatever they may be, once we are able to overcome that and sort of find a quiet place in your mind, even that we can start analyzing, how do I grow from this spiritually? And here we can apply all of these qualities of Spenta Armaity. So the very first thing is humility. I accept my circumstance. God has done, God has put me in this position. He knows I'm going to overcome it. He knows that there is something good in it for me, and I have to find it. I have to have the faith. I have to have the confidence that that is there, and I have to have the strength to work through it. So these are all qualities of Spenta Armaity. When somebody hurts your family, it's a very difficult thing to do. How do you put yourself aside, the pain and suffering of your family aside, and start loving that person and converting that person's love in, I mean, hate into love? It sounds very ridiculous, but it's a matter of growing spiritually. And obviously, we're not going to be able to do that in our first instance, and we'll fail many times. But when you grow with those thoughts, slowly, you will become aware that everything around you, the good and the bad, first of all, are all they all have a soul. Everyone has a soul in them. Even the most evil person has a soul. And it's the ability or learning how to put your self hurt, your self damage uh, aside for a moment and think about God and think about His will. And His will is to alchemize our souls. That's all our souls, not just the good people, but even the bad people, for obviously they need it more. So it's so then when you come to that realization, when you come to that understanding, God will give you some incredible strength to do what you need to do. You will be able to overcome things, and other people will not understand how you could do this, how you could hate somebody, how you could forgive somebody, how you could help somebody who has hurt you or your family. But when you see things with the different telescope, with the telescope of spirituality, with the telescope of perfecting yourself and your character and your soul and becoming more saintly, more God-like, more like the Yazids and Amisasmans, then you will see the virtues of trying to help that person, not because you love what they did and not because you love the person, but trying to help that person because you love God that is within that person, because you love God's purpose, which He's put all of us here for, and because you know that just as all of nature, the earth, the stars, the sun, the moon, everything is upholding this entire creation. All these yazids and all these divine entities are here continuously without rest, holding up creation to help deficient souls like you and me to move forward on the path of spiritual alchemy and wanting to become part of that movement, wanting to become part of what they do, wanting to understand God's will and wanting to help God in His will. When these kind of thoughts enter your mind, all this becomes a breeze. Forgiving people, moving on, rejection of ego, recognizing that what happens to me doesn't really matter, but I have to help these people. And you see it in saintly people. Mother Teresa is one example of a saintly person who did that. So here, I'm just going to end the topic on Spenta Armaity for the time being. In our next video, we'll take up one other Amishaspan and see their qualities and their virtues and what we can learn from them. In the meantime, I just do want to throw some of my books up here for you because obviously there's a lot more detail that we can do in books and writing than I can do in these videos. I'm trying to keep the videos as short as possible, so without leaving out too much information. But do take a look at some of these books. In our Simply Din magazine that you see up here, um, that magazine has a lot of topics on individual spiritual alchemy, and many topics. I cover different religions and how they progress also through individual spiritual alchemy. And of course, if you're very keen on the topic um, of individual spiritual alchemy, do look at the our book Freedom Bound, because it is just very inspirational. It has uh, it has a little bit of poetry to, sort of touch your soul, um, and help you sometimes if that is there. It's not full of poetry. It may have one poem at the beginning of several chapters in there. Um, and then it does talk about the whole process of spiritual alchemy, right from a person being faithless and wanting to just know more and understand more, uh, to becoming faithful, and then having the whole road towards that spiritual alchemy as it is outlined for us in our religion, to understand our religion with a little bit more depth, to understand how immensely profound our religion is. I really do recommend it. It's available both in print and in ebook format. And you visit our webpage to take a look at these books. See you next time. So we've Tarapor. Bye for now.